Hello, good afternoon everybody. As Rema said, I run an organization that advocates for free libraries that are open to all. One way in which we do this advocacy is by actually running 3 such libraries. So in Sheikh Sarai phase 1, which is not very far from here, we have a library that is free and open to all. We have 2,600 enrolled members in that library. Around 1,000 of them would have used the library in the last 6 months. We have a second library in Sikandarpur in Gurgaon by the metro station, and a third library in Sector 43. All 3 spaces are free and open to all. So we hear a lot nowadays about how sad it is that children no longer read, and I think that when we do that bemoaning, we are actually doing what we do in so many other spheres of our lives in this highly stratified society in which we live. We're actually ignoring a lot of people and concentrating on very few. So the very few who don't read any longer, I can't speak to whether they do or don't. All I want to say about them is that they are very few. The vast majority of people in India have never been invited to read. So the idea that people have given up on reading applies maybe to some people, maybe it doesn't even apply to them. But the majority of people in India do not have access to books, and this is children and adults. And because they don't have access to books, they have never been a part of the reading culture. There are very important, it's very important to look at the reasons why they've been excluded from reading. It is not an oversight. It is not because we are a poor country. It is not because we can't afford to. It is not because we invited them and they said no. Historically, we have been a society organized along caste lines, and one of the truths about the caste system is that education is only available to some, and for the majority of people, they are not only actively excluded from education, there is the possibility of pain of punishment for trying to attain education of any kind. Even in this day and age, that is alive and part of our DNA as a society. And I think I would argue it's strongly connected to why when we talk about, oh, those people who don't read, you know, we're not talking about the people, we're talking about some people, some very small group of people who were privileged to read and may now choose something else instead. We've also been a country that until a few decades ago and for a very long period in the past were ruled externally by a colonial power. Our education system is still bears the stamp of the education system that served that administrative, the needs of that the British Empire to govern a very large area and a very large group of people through indirect governance, which required a certain kind of education system that would create a certain kind of learner, and that is also still part of how we do our learning. So my own children, when they were young, went to school and learned how to do things like write a leave of application letter, and when one of them tried to be funny and write to the Prime Minister to ask for the railway stations to be shut down because he had a very funny story for it. He was actively discouraged from doing that kind of thinking. In fact, the teacher thought that he was being too funny. So we have a system that wants to create a certain kind of student, and all of this strongly ties to why we don't have a public library system in this country. I want to point out there are places in the country where there are viable library systems, and this is why we can certainly understand that it is an affordable reality. So if you go to Kerala, there is a viable library system. There is a library for every few thousand people, a library every couple of kilometers. I was at a tourist spot last Christmas. I went to Cherai beach in Kerala. Straight ahead of me was the ocean, so there was no library there, but a kilometer to the left and a kilometer to the right and a kilometer behind me, there were 3 libraries. I could have walked this way or that way, and roughly 1 to 2 to 3 kilometers all around me there were libraries. They were not the best libraries, but they were really quite adequate. There were a lot of books. There was a friendly person, and I could walk in and I could at minimum use the space to read. Coming to your organization today for this talk, I saw something called the Friends Library, and when I stepped in there, it did not look like the library in Chennai. For one thing, it costs 900 rupees a month, 1200 your first month because of the security deposit and so on. I peered through the glass and there were cubicles and a person sitting at each cubicle. It didn't look like a library, it looked more like a call center. There was a device, and I imagine the space was air conditioned, which is a real premium for us in the weather we live in, and given how much it costs. So I understand that people are probably scraping it together to pay that 900 a month for whatever short stretch of time they need that space to prepare for that exam, because all around this library there are all these educational institutions where people with some wherewithal are working hard to try to get ahead in this economy. So that's not the kind of library that I saw in Chennai, and it is not at all the kind of library that we're running. So I want to tell you, our 3 libraries are free. Free means they're free to anybody age 4, and grandparents come. It's open to adults also. All 3 of them are located in mostly working poor communities, the working class, who work. Some of the parents work 7 days a week. Maybe they have a day or 2 off in a month. They work early in the morning. Maybe they are doing jhadu pocha in somebody's house, or driving an auto rickshaw. And they're working all day. They may come home in the afternoon briefly, but they're working all day, and so we can best understand them if we look at them as the working poor of our country. They work 7 days a week. If both parents are living there, both of them are living here in the city, they're both working. Sometimes it's a migrant family where half the family at any given time is somewhere else. Sometimes some siblings are somewhere else. One parent is somewhere else in a village, and the other parent and some siblings are here. And there's a lot of movement back and forth between the village and here based on sometimes the seasonal nature of work. Sometimes it's based on the poor health. In the library, as I said, we have thousands of children and adults who come to our library, most of them children, a few adults. I've been astounded at how sick people are all the time, whether it's typhoid or tuberculosis or even the least little illness. It takes me back to my own childhood when my mother would put that rasna podi on my head and make sure I didn't catch colds. Children, if their head is wet, are often swaddled. If they have something going on in their ears, there's like things dipped in other things like concoctions and stuck in their ear. This enormous amount of effort at home to make sure the child doesn't get sick, because the working poor, just to sort of expand our understanding of what I mean by who comes to our library, are people who are afraid to get sick, because sometimes when you get sick, it means you have to leave your school, you have to leave your education, or you have to leave your job, you have to leave your home, you have to go somewhere else. Maybe a month goes by, maybe 5 months goes by, you come back, your house is gone, it's difficult to get a rental again. You slide so fast. The school system says, "Aapka to naam kat gaya." Children come all the time to the library and say, "Ma'am, hamara naam kat gaya." And I'm always saying, like 1,000 times I have said, 4,000 times we've said in the last 5 years that we've been open to various children, "Nahi, yahan kisi ka naam nahi katta hai, kabhi nahi katta hai." You are a member for life. It costs you nothing. You come in the door, you join the library, and you can come back 5 years later. You can take a book, you can lose a book, and you can come back and say, "I lost my book." If you don't come back, we actually go searching for you in the community. We go door knocking, we find your cousin who will tell us that you got sick and you had to go home, or will tell us that the mother just had a new baby and somebody is needed in the home to take care of the baby, so isliye wo aa nahi sakti abhi. नहीं कह दो उसको कि 5 ही मिनट लगेगा, बुक वापस कर सकती है, अगर खो गया है तो बता दो, माफ़ हो जाएगा, वो फिर से किताब ले सकती है. So what I want to tell you is that in our library, free and open to all is one of the most concrete ways we welcome people, but we also have around 100 other ways we welcome people. So we have what we call best practices, and an argument in our country is the unsaid arguments is the caste system, is the colonial education system that we still work with. That education is meant not for critical thinking, it's meant for writing applications of leave. It's meant to turn you into a worker. If your father was an auto rickshaw worker, maybe a worker one class above. If your father was a doctor, you'll get essentially the same kind of rote regurgitation education that was so important to administering the British Empire. So if your father was a doctor, you'll get something like that, and then you might become a doctor too. But essentially, whether you're looking at a government school system or a public school system, we're looking at education that is not geared toward critical thinking. So when I talk about a warm welcome in our library, about free and open to all, we have all these other best practices that support welcoming you to a very different kind of idea. Because there exists many ideas, the unsaid, unwritten, so often purposely misunderstood ideas like our education system and its limitations and the caste system, but also many ideas we are happily espousing left, right and center. Ideas like वो पढ़ेंगे नहीं, ये लोग और पढ़ेंगे. I went to a class, an NGO had a Silai class for young women, and I went to invite the young women to come to our library. We were like really close to them. It was just a walk, and they would have been in the library. And the teacher, for some reason, took it upon herself to humiliate me and the class that day, but really to humiliate the idea that I'm talking about. She said, "Ye log aur padhenge?" And then she called a girl forward, must have been 17, 18, 21-year-old girl, I'm not sure. And she said, "Kahan tak padhe hain?" And the girl hung her head, this young woman hung her head and said, "Do tak." Batao kahan pe? Gaon mein. And then she turned to me and grimaced, made faces, said more things that are like almost painful to repeat here, because we believe in India that some people will never read. So why should we create anything for them? We believe that there is a class of people in our country who do not belong in spaces like this one and in spaces like the library that we run, in spaces like the 36 public library buildings that the Delhi government runs. Some of them are small, some of them are a little bigger. None of them are stadium sized. They would need to be bigger than Talkotra Stadium if we wanted 35 libraries to serve 21 million people in this country. So in this city. So we've already decided in Delhi that lots and lots of people are ye log. And they're never the people that we worry about when we say आजकल बच्चे पढ़ ही नहीं रहे हैं, like वो inculcate नहीं हो रहा है. We must inculcate the reading habit. We're not talking about inculcating for that young woman, the one who belongs to ये लोग और पढ़ेंगे. ये नहीं पढ़ेंगे, ये कहाँ पढ़ेंगे? So the things we freely own to, the things that are with us, that we see, we hear, we stand silently by and allow, the things that we sometimes espouse with our own tongue, those things we can address much quicker and much easier than the huge history that backs up those things. So our libraries, when I said that we are an advocacy organization, we are a political organization, we see ourselves pushing against this history, and we see ourselves today pushing against the form that history takes, the form of only 35 libraries for 21 million people. What is that? That is open espousal of an understanding that a few people deserve to read. So when we push against that, we're obviously pushing politically. We are talking about making space in society for people who are not given space right now, we're talking about rearranging society, rearranging the wealth. Who does Kabir belong to? Does Kabir belong in a bookstore? We have wonderful bookstores in this country. In Delhi, there are beautiful bookstores with beautiful books. 350 rupees, 699 rupees, 445 rupees. These are huge percentages of the income of someone who rides an auto, who drives an auto rickshaw or does jhadu pocha, who comes to your house at 5:30 a.m. to dress your children so that you can go to work and your children go to school, and then rushes home in the afternoon, rests a little, makes one more meal, makes her own house clean, and then leaves again. So when we allow these kinds of inequalities to happen, the only way we can change that is actually by speaking very openly and very clearly, and being willing to say that this is political work. I talk about political work here because it is expected of non-governmental organizations that we will be apolitical, that हम अच्छे करेंगे, हम भले करेंगे, but we will not talk about discrimination, that we will not talk about political work, that we will fill gaps, what the government is unwilling or unable to do, what the populace is comfortable with the government not doing, what we don't ask our government to do for us. The NGO sector will fill it to some degree, allowing all of us to be somewhat comfortable, and will write our checks, and people will come around hat in hand and will put our 10 or 100 or 1,000 rupees even in there and say it's done. It's not done. It's not done like that, not if we're talking about political work. One of the things that we realized we need to do this political work is to counter the argument that people will not read, or people don't need to read, or that we're a poor country, so we need to concentrate on, roti kapda makan, and fix the government schools so they're a little bit better. That one of the things that we as an organization needed to do is to have working models. So no one can say that people will not read, because every single day in our library there are lines of people waiting to borrow books, to return books, and to take the books home, to read it to their mother, to read it to their sister, to take it to class and read it to their classmates. Teachers come to me and they tell me, I was waiting all year, abhi time mila, summer ho gaya hai, to maine socha aapko bata दूंगी कि आपके लाइब्रेरी वाओ, बच्चे इतना पसंद करते हैं, क्लास में बुक्स ले आए हैं, तो हमने भी सोचा क्लास में हम भी एक छोटा लाइब्रेरी बना लेते हैं बच्चों के लिए, क्योंकि there are children in that classroom who live too far away. The 2,600 people who are enrolled in the library closest to your organization, those are kids who walked in on their own two legs, and they walked in from within a 1 kilometer radius. They go to schools that draw kids from the next kilometer. Those kids in Begumpur don't come, in Hausrani they don't come to our library. The kids in Chirag Dilli do, the kids in Panchsheel Vihar do. The largest group of kids in our Sheikh Sarai branch library are kids who come from the Jagdamba camp, which is a kind of a Pakki Basti that's been around for a few decades. So the kids read. I'll admit that most of the adults don't or can't, or maybe the 7-day work week is hugely preventative, or maybe having only a class 2 education makes them hesitant to step in. We're doing lots and lots of things to make sure that everybody understands how welcome they are. Beyond free and open to all, we have taken on practices like an admission process that's very easy. A 4-year-old can come in and say, usually the 4-year-old has someone they're dragging in because the 4-year-old is already a member, and they'll drag this other one in and say, iska kar do ma'am. And a lot of kids will come in and say form, and because I try to get them to engage, I'll stop them and say kaun sa form, and kya form, and then we'll talk, and admission form de do ma'am isko. So it's just name and Janam Tithi. Our first 3 years, we did not ask the child. We asked, but we did not insist that a parent come. We've been around for 5 years now. In the last 2 years, as we've built a certain critical mass and understanding in the neighborhood, we've started asking the child to bring a parent or some adult in their life, because we know that makes a better membership, that our retention is higher when an adult is involved, but also it's a way to give what all our best practices are trying to do is to create the kind of welcome which is kind of a surround sound effect of support for that child. When you are a baby and your mother takes you by the hand and helps you take those first steps, when your father brings food to your mouth and teaches you to chew and swallow, because these are things that, you know, if you have a stroke tomorrow, an occupational therapist will have to teach you how to eat again and how to walk again. These are really complex things that human beings learn how to do. When you are 4 and you walk into our library and your mother doesn't walk in with you and your father doesn't walk in with you, you are doing something so difficult. And all your life, your parents have taken you where they have been. You're 4 years old. Your dad has put you in his cycle rickshaw, or your mother has taken you on the metro, or she's taken you to the sabzi market and you've bought something and you've seen how the money moves. You're understanding 10,000 things about how the world works. Then suddenly you find that there is something, it's almost like a black hole, because you look at it and it's not something your parents have shown you. They didn't point it out, they've never been in it, they don't know what it is, you see it, and in glimpses you catch a glimpse of it because somebody else takes your hand, another 4-year-old, and tells you, here it is, come in. One of our student leaders told me he waited outside our door 5 months while he watched his friends go in and out. He came as far as the door, he stood on the gully outside, his friend went in, his friend went out, his friend's name is Guddu, and Guddu said, Auna, and after 5 months he went in. He told me, his name is Gaurav, we had an annual report we had to put out and I had asked him for a quote. He said, मुझे 5 महीने लगा मैम, फिर मैं अंदर आया और अच्छा लगा. And he said, actually he said अजीब लगा, और फिर किसी ने मेरा पिक्चर लिया और मुझे अजीब लगा. And I said, अजीब कैसा, बुरा या? And he said, थोड़ा अच्छा थोड़ा बुरा भी लगा. And then he talked about how somebody laughed and he laughed with that ma'am, and time went on, and he was invited to join the student council, which is part of the democratic nature of our organization. Our board of trustees has a representative from the youth membership that sits in on all the decision making. There are no discussions in which that representative is not a part. So he is now one of the student council, one of the body of people that run the library. And he said, सबसे ज़्यादा मुझे डर लगा और मैं चाहता हूँ कि चिराग दिल्ली में भी ऐसा लाइब्रेरी हो जैसे हमारे पास है. Kids come from चिराग दिल्ली, but it's a stretch. It's a long walk, especially in the heat. And he said, मैं चाहता हूँ कि और भी ऐसे बहुत सारे लाइब्रेरीज़ हो और उन सब में एक स्टूडेंट काउंसिल होना चाहिए. मैं ऐसा लाइब्रेरी बनाना चाहता हूँ जिसमें लोगों को डर ना लगे. So this is what happens in a political system that is stratified like ours, one that we want to undo, that one that we are fighting a political battle with. We are going to have to deal with the kind of alienation and fear that has excluded people and create systems that are so inclusive. Everything from that easy membership application to the democratic structure of the organization, to best practices like we have open shelves. Upstairs you have books on shelves and you can all read the spines. I don't know how you borrow it or don't borrow it. In our library you don't. I know of a library where you have to wash hands to use the library. She's very lovely. I've met the person who runs it and the other people who run it, and they're really nice people. And it's an NGO type library and they do have to wash their hands. I would rather the book got dirty. I know another organization that has libraries where they keep the book uncovered. We cover with clear plastic many books that are fragile, that are more easily torn, like your Amar Chitra Katha falls apart, so we try to cover them. we cover them so it can last longer. She doesn't, they don't cover their books because they're afraid that the books are not being used, because they deposit libraries in places and then they're afraid they will not get used. So if there's no cover, they can see if somebody used the book. That's their way of checking on that. We see such heavy use. Last year, we still only had 2 libraries last year. The 3rd library started this year. Last year, we issued around 41,000 books. Kids don't have to wash their hands. They can browse the shelves. We have a ratio of minimum 7 to 1 book, which is the international standard for what minimum books you should have in a library. The ideal minimum is actually 10 to 1. We'd like to get there someday. So there's close to 8,000 books in Sheikh Sarai, serving the around 1,000 active members in that library. Children can choose the book, free choice. They go to the circulation desk. In many, many cases, and especially on Sundays all day, they will find the circulation desk, the software that we use to issue the book, the device that's on that desk, the entire system that backs it up. It's all being staffed by children like Gaurav, our student council member. It's huge. As a best practice, nothing beats the loneliness and alienation of doing what your parents didn't take you by the hand and help you see and do, like seeing someone else from your neighborhood. भैया कर रहे हैं, दीदी कर रहे हैं, तो हम भी कोशिश करते हैं. So they come in, they borrow the book, they take it home. Many libraries do not let people take books home, which is totally counterintuitive, unless your intuition is built by those other systems like the caste system. कि ये लोग और पढ़ेंगे. So kids take the books home, they read them, they bring it back. When you have read 10 books in our library, there's a huge hoopla. People applaud in line as you turn in your 10th book and borrow your 11th one, and you're handed a giant packet of Oreos, Mumi Takaro. Your name is put up on the honor roll of readers, which right now has around 1,400 names on it. 1,400 children who have read at least 10 books. Many have read 20, many have read 40, 80, 100, 200. Someday when you read 100 books, the hoopla is even bigger. Hopefully you will bring your parents with you to the Sunday assembly at which you're feted, applauded, given a school bag filled with books chosen specially for your age and your interest. By then you've read 100 books. You've engaged with the book report clinic. We are a citizen initiative. A lot of the work in our organization is done by the student council, the member leaders. A lot of the work is done by activist citizens in our community who believe we need a public library movement, and they come in and run the organization with us. And absolutely the organization would not run with our paid staff. There's no room in this world to run organizations that are pieced together, not this kind of important work, pieced together by someone who gives 4 hours and someone who gives another 4 hours. Our librarians stitch it all together and run really brilliant libraries. So the kids do read. And the book report clinic is where they get 20 one-on-ones before they come through that 100-book door. It takes about a year to get there, the 100 books. That 20 one-on-ones, the book report is an excuse for us sitting down with you and asking you, कैसे लगा? अच्छा, you read लड़का किसने पूछा क्यों? That's Bhimrao Ambedkar's. It's a picture book. It's meant for children. It tells Ambedkar's story from when he was a boy, and when he questioned why he was not allowed to participate in society. May have all kinds of things to offer in that book report clinic. From the bare minimum, I read the story, or I struggled, I had trouble reading, अच्छा हम साथ पढ़ते हैं, और I read it and फिर मैंने मम्मी को भी सुनाया. This girl Pinky told me, मैंने मम्मी को भी सुनाया, उन्होंने कहा ये तो हमारी जाति की कहानी है. So our book report clinic is another best practice, another part of this long-term welcome that tries to undo all the unwelcome that exists out there. I need to talk to you about 5 more minutes, and then we can do question and answers. So the last thing I want to say is, without covering tons more of our best practices, which includes lots of specialized programming. Earlier I mentioned surround sound. So we have dance, we have drama, we have painting, we have acting, we have special programs that help you know your body. We don't really know how to do it ourselves, so we invite other organizations. Right now, YP Foundation is working with us to deliver a lot of preteen and teen sexuality, wellness, gender. So kids who want to know, is it okay to cut our pubic hair? You can find your answer. That's what a library is supposed to be. It is an information center. It's a center that constantly works with society's ideas of itself. It's a mirror. Right now, our library system is showing us how awful we are in some ways, but also because we are also part of that library system. We also have libraries. I can tell you that it's also showing us how we're all struggling in India to become a better version of ourselves, because potentially we have that inside ourselves to do that. So kids come in, we look at everything, like simple things to complex things to pubic hair and all that's in between those topics. And that kind of surround sound workshops are key. So why do we need to do all this? I'm going to not cover reading fluency because Michael, who's here with us, will talk about it a little bit maybe in the question and answer part of the our discussion. We cannot run a society that's democratic. I saw the little framed constitution upstairs on your bookshelf. There's a little framed beginning of our constitution. We cannot do what that thing tells us we are. We cannot be what we say we are in our constitution if we do not give access to people, not only to information. I know you guys talk a lot about information here. We talk a lot about information in our library. We have to actually think in terms of critical thinking. You can have a lot of information in a building, and if we do not make it possible for people to really access that information, which involves all sorts of things, Oreo cookies and fearlessness and mummy saath nahi aaye or main apne dost ko la raha hu, it involves all these things that I've talked about. Access involves all that. Access also means that you really have to be able to read a lot to be able to read. And if we don't read a lot to be able to read, like if all you ever read, when I was in school, we would get a Hindi reader, a Malayalam reader, and an English reader. And the reader was thinner than this. When I was in class 1, it was Rani, Madan, Amar Bhaiya, Ao, Rani, Ao, Kawa, Aya, etc., etc. I mean, that stuff is like in my brain. If you spend the whole year and you get 3 readers equal in thickness to this, and later on in life you also get a history class and you also get a civics class, you will never ever achieve fluency. If you do not have a 1:7 ratio, ideally a 1:10 ratio, ideally a room with open shelves and free choice and thousands and 10,000s of books, if you do not have access to that, that room with books is meaningless. If someone doesn't take you in, if someone doesn't make drama a possibility and music a possibility and teen wellness a possibility and a warm welcome a possibility, and you don't read those books, if you don't read those books, you never become a reader. Until you read, you cannot read. If someone theoretically explains to you that ka se kabutar, you'll spend your whole life very confused about what reading is. You may achieve some level of literacy, be able to do some amount of work that requires some amount of literacy, whether it's following a script in a call center or being a salesperson at the mall or selling a cup of coffee or whatever that requires a little bit of, you could do all of that, but because you didn't read thousands of books, you, that powerful, amazing thinker that you are with all those thoughts in your head, you are missing one of the most powerful tools ever invented, one of the most powerful apps, one of the most powerful pieces of technology that anybody has ever made. Kabir in a book has traveled generations to come here for you, powerful thinker, and you were excluded, so you never read it. Kabir just died a little bit because you didn't read Kabir. And you died a little bit because you didn't read Kabir, and your society died with you. For us to live and breathe and flourish, everyone has to enter reading. And until people enter reading, they cannot use that tool which makes them better critical thinkers, more critical as thinkers, more capable of participating in the society of which they are a part. Critical thinking depends on reading because the most powerful tool for thinking is books. Reading has brought books to us today. People read them to keep them alive. If we want to keep these ideas alive, if we want to engage with the ideas, if we want to talk back to the ideas, if we want to agree, if we want to change the idea, we need to enter reading to do it. There's a lot of technical understanding about what reading actually is, the neurology and how it works, which Michael can work with you on. He's our curriculum coordinator, co-coordinator. We have 2 curriculum co-coordinators. A good library needs a curriculum, especially when we're talking about bringing in people who haven't had access to it before. Finally, we believe in digital citizenship, in access to digital information. We are a poor organization with next to no budget. We scrape by, but nevertheless, all our libraries have laptops. Nobody has to wash their hands to use them. Everybody can come in. The home page will take you to the games you want to play and to the videos you want to watch, and that's the bulk of what people do because the net is about freedom to move, and our young members are freely moving in the net with some parental, restrictions for the young ones. The really little ones come together in groups of 5 with the Didi Bhaiya who shows them how. The goal this year for the student council, the student leaders in our libraries, is to understand digital citizenship themselves, because by now we've figured out that things they understand transmit easily. Things that we understand and then we try to bring others into, they don't work as well. The primary methodology in our library for inviting people to reading is not handing out a reader, and it's not even like that free access and open shelves and take the book home and read it to your mother and your sister. It's actually the read aloud, where we open the book and read aloud. Year 2, we have now been here for 5 years. Year 2, we got our student council into a training, and we changed all our training material to address that. We were talking at that point to 12 to 15-year-olds. Now we're talking to 15 to 19-year-olds. And our student leaders learned how to do the read aloud. Overnight, there was a sea change. On days that our circulation desk is open, we are open 7 days a week, 4 days a week we issue books. The neighborhood of our library is swarming with hundreds of children. Typically we issue around 500 books a week at each of our locations. Hundreds of children are walking around in groups or alone. Some are reading and walking while others watch that they don't fall into gaddas. And what we know is that in that neighborhood that night, there will probably be somewhere in the order of a couple of 100 read alouds where someone reads to someone else. And we think that our cyber project, we call it the cyber project, we think our digital access program will take a leap this year, because a year ago we put out the laptops, a year ago we started trying to talk to kids about how to use it, how to be safe, what are the rules as far as downloading and eating food. We watched and saw that the girls didn't come and only the boys came. We did women and girls only day. We brought on interns. We went door to door and we talked. We said free help registering for DU, for NIOS, for Open University, for IGNU. And we registered half a dozen kids this year. When we put out the banner, the cyber cafe down the street waited till we left the building and they took the banner down because they charge. Most of the cafes around there charge 100, 200, 300 rupees to help you enroll. All your life, if you're poor, you're getting poorer because your mummy daddy did not have a laptop at home. If you want to use have access to the digital world, you prevail on your parents to pay 700 rupees and you get on 2 buses and you go to some center in Lajpat Nagar and someone teaches you from 7 a.m. to 12 and you're in a class of 30 and there's only so many devices and someone teaches you to do ridiculous things. If you remember Hrithik Roshan in that Koi Mil Gaya story where the open and save the file, this is absolutely ridiculous. The time, the energy, the waste, I mean the sheer tragedy of it all. Kids come to our library, they play with the stuff, they learn. They teach each other, and this year we have a goal that our student council will become equipped to be thinking about what does digital access mean. When I got the invitation to come here today, my primary motivation was to talk to you about the overall project so that you too can be supportive, but specifically to be supportive of what we're trying to do with our digital access program. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer questions. And if you have questions about what is reading actually, what are the mechanics of it, or how does it work, or how do we become critical thinkers, Michael can talk to you about that. It's the Community Library Project. The Community Library Project. We run our libraries in collaboration with other organizations. Generally, the collaboration takes the form of free space and a kind of these are organizations like in Sheikh Sarai, it's Dipalya NGO and the Narang Trust. In Sikandarpur, it's Agrasar, which is an NGO. And in Sector 43, we're working with Naidisha. We're going to be opening one in South Extension this year, which will be the first library we have. Our libraries are so beautiful. I mean, we have like gorgeous shelves. We have, the Buddha series, the graphic novel series with the spines so beautifully tell the story of Buddha growing up, if you've seen that. Tintin, if you grew up reading Tintin, we have it in English and Hindi. We have Harry Potter in English and Hindi. If you are into the vampire blood-sucking books, we have those. We have Goosebumps in Hindi for the little kids who want to read Goosebumps. Percy Jackson, Shakespeare, Tagore, Premchand. Yeah, you name it, we have it. Malgudi Days, Ruskin Bond, Roald Dahl. I'm talking about authors whose books we have dozens of copies of. All the award-winning books, we have them all. So the space is free, makes it possible for us to be more sustainable. There is a lot of defunct space in this city and elsewhere in this country. In almost all cases, the space was either defunct even to the point where it was filled with rubbish and it had to be cleared out, or it was just underutilized, and they said, sure, you can use it. We are so beautiful that there are people who come into the library that are middle class, that we have like little kids who are enrolled in Waldorf. I don't know if you know the Waldorf school system. Very, very special school system, more special than Montessori, like really lovely school system that encourages children to be themselves. We have children of professors, we have, we have a minority of our members are like a tiny minority, 5–10% are middle class and upper middle class kids. When we open our library in South Extension, we're very excited because we're pretty sure we're going to have half and half. And it will look like what libraries really are supposed to look like. Our library looks like what a library should look like. It's beautiful, it's open, it's free, people use it, it's lively, there's lots of engaged thinking. But we're in urban villages. We are in the Harijan Basti in Sector 43. We've created 2 other libraries that we don't own and operate that are run by the NGO Dipalya. One in Golkuam Basti in the shadow of that big mountain of garbage. Another in Sanjay Colony next to the Sanjay Colony Basti. So mostly these are libraries that are open to the community, but our libraries are not used very often by the middle class. Truly democratic library spaces around the world, excellent libraries, have don't just promote democracy in some sort of theoretical way. You'll actually see it in action inside a library. If I lived for a long time abroad and I saw people side by side, and more recently when I was in Chennai, I noticed that those libraries in Kerala, like everyone is walking in. Tourists were walking in, and the neighborhood was using it. All kinds of people in the neighborhood, and gender, like women were using it and men were using it, boys and girls were using it.
I wanted to know about the initial challenges. Like you spoke about this woman recently humiliating you and the other woman saying, "Ye log kya padhe?" So I wanted to know about the initial challenges in the initial days, when you started the initiative. What were the first few mobilizing people? Like, how do you get kids to come to the library?
Because we run it like a political project, like an organizing project, like a community organizing project, we use organizing tools, ideas, like mobilization, like going door to door, like we agitate. When I go to a door, I ask a parent, बच्चे आपके बहुत सोचते होंगे, हाँ, स्कूल में सोचने को मिलता है, and parents will give me a earful because they are so worried for their children कि ये लोग वो सब कैसे कर पाएंगे जो हमें खुद नहीं मालूम करना, इनको हम आगे कैसे करेंगे. I mean, it is so painful as a parent to not know how to help your kid. I mean, I have children, so I know what it feels like. The few times in my life when we had to do something, when the child had to do something that I couldn't really help them with, that's a really difficult thing, and agitation is a good tool. If you are agitated, some of my hope here today is to agitate you, that you should be concerned about the society you live in. Our members, young members, parents are really anxious for their children, and they're anxious for their collective good. And so the other point of agitation is to talk about the collective good, and we talk about it, that there's every one of those parents is aware that there's little or no hope of getting ahead alone. Maybe they know this better, like this, ये लोग should apply in a different context to all of us in this look. हम लोग नहीं समझते हैं कि हमें कितनी ज़रूरत है इनके, and they understand that they need one another, and so collective sort of use of the library, collective agitation has been a good tool for people coming together. Our reading room is not a silent space. We allow people to talk to each other. I was speaking with someone earlier about, she worked in Toy Bank, your colleague, and we have a game room program. Kids come to play. So these just understanding what people's issues are and agitating them on it. Parents are very concerned that their children are not safe. They're not safe because they don't know about sexuality and wellness, so our workshops are useful. They're also not safe because parents are working 7 days a week, morning 5 a.m. to evening 9, 10 p.m. I'm always calling children and reminding them to come to a workshop on their parents' phone, and finding that father who answers the phone is, ma'am, अभी तो मैं ड्यूटी पे हूँ, आप कितने बजे घर 10:30 को, 10:30 at night. And early days, one of our early day tragedies was one of our members died. He died because he fell into the nala that sweeps by not far away from our Chirag Dilli Nala. Yeah, and it caused a lot of agitation in the community, and because we are part of the community, it agitated everyone in the library, and people looked for a story for why did this happen. The boy was very little. He was part of our intensive intervention program for 4 to 6 year olds. He had been part of that program when he was around 4 or 5, and had been part of that program for about a year plus before he moved into the older batch. And we saw him every Saturday morning with juice and biscuits and song and friendship time in the circle. For 2 hours he came and he played, and he was safe with us. And then he was not safe because he went out and played, and no one has bothered to put up a fence, and no one has thought about the safety of children who live there. He died senselessly, a healthy child at a very young age, and his friends were with him when he died, and they saw it happen and they could not help him, and they all have to live with that just as we do for the rest of our lives. And they didn't tell anybody for hours. And then in the evening, when the parents closed the shop at 7 o'clock, I think they had a tea shop, they started looking for their children, and the lack of safety is unbelievable. It is horrifying. So our library is a safe space in multiple ways. from literally being a safe place. Plus it's a pankha space. Children come in all sweaty and running around and they sit down because they want a pankha. Sometimes they go like this to the book on the table, they bat at it. It has never bothered me that people who have access to books may choose to not read, because there are some of us in this room who buy books and never read them, who have had access to books and don't read them. Why do we expect that when poor people are given a good thing, they should become good people who use the good thing? This is asinine. This is counter to our expectations for ourselves and our children. So the library is a safe space that meets a huge need in the community, and it makes for a very successful organization. We've defined ourselves broadly as something that has to work within the community. 18 to 25-year-olds, we went out and we surveyed them, and we found out their top issues are: how can I get into a higher education space or into employment? And how do I manage my mental health issues, relationship/mental health? My girlfriend doesn't talk to me anymore. I don't know what I did wrong. My mother hates that I have a girlfriend. She doesn't want to talk to me. She says I have to leave her first, otherwise she won't talk to me. So this is like, we surveyed, we found out issues. We had a year-long engagement called with Breakthrough India called 50/50. It was a gender-related program, gender-related issue-driven program that attempted to give people access to the cyber project. Involved lots of door-to-door work. Some of it was pretty crude, like we had icons on a piece of paper like YouTube and so on, and we went door to door and we talked to lots of young people and said, what do you recognize on this page? Do you recognize the Google icon? Do you recognize it? What do you want? Again, more and more, everybody said education, and then they said YouTube, and mostly people use our cyber project to hang out on the net. And a little bit the word is spreading, and people are becoming aware that they can come in and figure out how to get access to the net, and perhaps even enroll in. And a couple of people have already done the open school, and people are training how to help other people do those things. Gosh, I was going to say something else and I forgot. I talk a lot. Michael, will you come forward? Because I think maybe someone else will. You can answer.
I don't want to tell you the whole story, but it was messy for a long time. We should be clear, like we were starting as kind of a book club, not a political thing particularly, just kind of like a nice thing to do with the NGO and that's nearby. And then like we had this flood of children interested in, all of a sudden we had 60 children coming for this book club, and 2 or 3 of us kind of trying to do read alouds. And so the 6-month period between, there was a 6-month transition that was pretty messy, all volunteer done, and kind of scary at times, and I think what Mridu's saying in that process, kind of figuring out how to figure out how to really not to become part of the community, not just to react to this flood that was sort of interested in, and then the other thing was to try to figure out how to build. We are really serious about being kind of a lab for figuring out how to run this well, because we do recognize that we're not going to be able to do this. We don't want to have an organization that runs 1,000 libraries. We want to have an organization that runs some really good libraries and is a provocation to get other people to do that. So the question on curriculum has been sort of this process of figuring things out. In the beginning, we knew read alouds we know that they work. I mean, there's lots of research all over the world that read alouds are important, and they should work here, and we found that they did. But in the process of kind of working through it, we figured out that here they work in a little bit different, for different reasons than they do in the US, for example, or in the West. Partly because here they provide this sort of very important bridge between oral traditions, which are still really alive in the communities that we serve. So they provide a bridge between oral traditions and what happens in a book. Because if you're going from a storytelling environment, which happens, right? Which we have, kids talk, they have storytelling in their communities. That's a social thing. Going straight to a book seems like a pretty lonely transition. So what read alouds do is they sort of bridge that. It's a social environment, and yet you understand all of a sudden that inside of this book can be this really interesting story. And in fact, the story is something that we can collectively think about, right? It's not something that we're going to samjhana. Like a lot of times when we do read alouds, and we see this in read aloud. We have to train against this in read aloud trainings. That one of the primary techniques in Indian schools for teaching comprehension, I read this longitudinal study in 2 different states, it happens all over, is called samjhana. I mean, we call it samjhana. Like, I'm going to read you a sentence, and then I'm going to samjhana. I'm going to tell you exactly what I just read. Right? That's not what a storyteller does, right? Storytellers don't do that. And the reason why we have to do it is because we never taught comprehension well from the beginning. So when you get to preemption in 8th or 9th grade, you're confused because you haven't read lots and lots of literature. If you've read lots and lots of literature, that's how you get the vocabulary and the stuff, right? If you've read all that, then when you get to preemption in 9th grade, it's not so hard. You can hear it. You'll have to learn some new vocabulary, but you won't have to have every sentence explained to you as if it's a foreign language, right? But that's so. What we do is one of the biggest thing Mridula talked about is read aloud, and read aloud is crucial. So it's a bridge, but it's also a place where we model thinking and we get kids to think. So it's not about what color cap did the kid have, what is the name of the 3 main characters, what is the setting. I mean, that may be important or it may not be, but what may be more important is why did that child do that? Have you ever done anything like that? Have you ever thought anything like that yourself? Those are things good readers do all over the world. Good readers, they think, we interact with the text. So we have to teach that, and the way to do it is read aloud. So that's one thing we do throughout our program. And the second thing, I guess, is just that we've come to realize that most of the students in New Delhi can read. We sense this in our working with students, and then we assessed it and found out that what the other thing that's true is that most of them don't read very well. In other words, they don't read very fluently, because when you get that reader that has 12 stories and 6 poems in it, that's not enough text to become a fluent reader. That won't happen. You have to read a lot. And so what we're doing, if we taught bicycle riding like we teach reading, what we would do is we would say to somebody, okay, so here's a bicycle and I'm going to lecture you on it for an hour. And then I'm going to give you a worksheet to fill out about that bicycle. And then I might let you get on the bicycle and ride it for 2 minutes, and that's good for the day. Right? And then the next time we're going to also hear another lecture about bicycle riding and turning and everything. And what we know about reading is that we have to do it a lot, right? You have to read a lot to become a good reader. So in order to go from becoming a functional reader, and a lot of people we see that teachers say this reader's fine. When we assess them in terms of rates of how easily they read, they don't read very easily. They have to think about each word. Bahut, bada. I mean, if you're sounding out bahut bada, and I'm not kidding, like it's not that is something that kids do, you have a real problem. I mean, you're all of your energy is going into decoding. You're not being able to think about what you're reading, right? So the other program, and I won't go into it in detail, but the other program that we're running, and we have a grant from Penguin India now to run it year round. We've done it for 3 years, sort of on pilot basis. Is a reading fluency program where kids they get a read aloud, they get maybe a little mini lesson, and a lot of what they do is read. They read with their partner, they read a book that they choose, and they just spend time reading. And we measure it, and we can see that there's really big gains. I mean, we see like an average of this last round of 6 weeks, which is the longest we did, and we saw kids go like maybe 20 words a minute gain. Now that doesn't seem like a lot, but in America, generally we expect 30 words in a year in terms of like progress. So 20 words in 6 weeks is pretty darn good. And what comes with that is sort of confidence. So because we do believe that in order to become, it's not just about reading faster. I mean, mostly it's about reading more powerfully and reading more easily. Because when we read, pravase, hum bhi samajhdari se padh sakte hain. I mean, it's really important that we can do so we're a little bit about looking at the low-hanging fruit of what really needs to be happening. Now, we do encounter kids that can't read a lot at all, or that read very, very poorly. Generally, it's very rare. I'm a special ed teacher, so I can say this. Like, we almost never find anybody who knows nothing. Like when we say, he doesn't know kuch nahi aata. That's almost never the case. I mean, they know something. I mean, they know something about reading, but we do find kids that functionally can't really even decode connected text, and so we're working on other programs for that. Anyway, that's enough about curriculum.